All right, Chris. So the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, what do you want to start with? What do you want to talk about first in regard to this?
So, Rich, it's quite an interesting subject because this is something in the West that people just don't know about. Now, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, we're going to call it the SCO just to save time. 40% of the world's population lives under this organization. A third of the world's wealth lives under this organization. Yet, in the Western media's narrative, it almost doesn't exist, to the point where I can imagine a lot of people won't understand what this show is going to be about because they've never heard of this. And a lot of people, they've heard maybe about the SAO, they've heard these terms about BRICS, they don't really understand what these organizations are. Are they military alliances? Is it somehow sort of the opposite of NATO, but China's version? There's a lot of sort of disinformation going around, or no information at all. So I think we should just sort of iron out what it is, what it actually does, why it's important to the developing world going forward. And by the developing world, I don't mean poorer nations in Africa that maybe some of them aren't members or aren't really treated to a lot of the development that is going on. But like I say, nearly half the world's population benefits directly from the decisions of this organization. So I think it is important for our viewers to really understand what it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a very big, very important organization that covers, I mean, you've got India, you've got China, you've got Russia, you've got almost all of the stands. And then, as you'll see, we'll discuss later, Iran is going to be joining, or is about to join. So it involves all of Asia, almost all of mainland Asia.
Yeah.
So it's massive. It's really massive. So yeah, I think what I want to push up first for to discuss this is in terms of its foundation. When did this start, and where does this sit in sort of in time and history? So I've got a thing here from a website called responsiblestatecraft.org, which talks about the origin basically. And so this starts actually long before Xi Jinping, before Putin. It starts with, in fact, actually going back. I mean, it depends how far you draw the line. So let me just get this article up here. But it talks about going back to the end of Brezhnev's era. So very far back. So we're talking about the late 70s. So this idea of reunifying Russia and China and linking up economically was being touted back then. And even Gorbachev, suggested the idea of pivoting to Asia, normalizing relations with the Chinese priority, with China as a priority. Just make sure that you guys can see that. Okay. But really, it starts with Boris Yeltsin, and Jiang Zemin. So if you aren't familiar with your Chinese statesmen, you have Xi Jinping now, you had Hu Jintao, then Jiang Zemin, and before that, Deng Xiaoping. So Jiang Zemin is the guy who comes after Deng Xiaoping, so in the 90s.
Jiang Zemin was the premier who presided over the handed over of Hong Kong back to China, I believe, wasn't it?
That's correct. Yeah, 97, 99, that would have been him. Yeah, that's him. And a big part of this thing is, of course, they were disillusioned with the new unipolar world, the US-led world back in the 90s. Okay, so this is after the Cold War, after the collapse of the USSR, and you're talking about the birth of the relations there beginning. So this expression also is quite important to note here, is this expression of the multipolar world. I know that it's a word or an expression that's been used in international studies for a long time, but you see a policy with this name on it. So you see the Russia-Chinese joint declaration on a multipolar world and the establishment of a new international order, which was signed by Yeltsin and Jiang Zemin, which I have up here as well. But it's just it's a document written in 1997. It's not particularly, we can't go over all. It's a 1,000-page document. We can't go over all of it right now. But yeah, that's where you see the beginning of this. These new structures, the SCO, BRICS, and all of the other multipolar sort of organizations. I
think that's really interesting to point out, because obviously on the show we use that term a lot about multipolarism and the era of a multipolar world. Especially this year, we've been talking about it more due to Putin's speech a few months ago, where he stated this is the beginning of the era of a multipolar world. But it just shows that after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, there was this immediate urge to reconcile the fact that America is now going to act and behave and believe itself to be the one polar of the world and the only power. And there was straight away this expectation in some senses, in some circles, for China specifically to step in, not as a competitor, not as a replacement, in a might sort of way, but as a way to rebalance the world with multipoles, different to how it was with the United States and Soviet Union, but equal in its importance.
Yeah. In terms of the nature of the actual SCO, so yeah, like you said, with a unipolar world dominated by the US, or perhaps you could look at maybe even Britain for a certain period of time had that sort of unipolar power, and then Cold War, you have bipolar, two poles. There's something different though, that the Chinese are very intent, sort of when it comes to the SCO, they have a big intent on emphasizing that this is a new form of international relations. So it's trying to be something very different to what we've seen in the past. And there's a particular expression that they have here, which is, do not enter an alliance, do not oppose each other, do not take action against a third party, and obviously be good neighbors, good partners, and good friends. Okay. So it's obviously quite cryptic, some of this. And I think that's some of the criticism that has been weighted against SCO meetings, is that they're kind of talking shops and people don't really know what it is. And it is a little bit confusing, but that's because it's not something that fits into one of the boxes, I think, that we've had, at least for the last 70 years. It's not a Cold War alliance yet, at least. I mean, obviously things in Ukraine can change that. But what's important to stress here is that because you've got India, you've got Pakistan, you've got countries, and China too, which have actual differences and disagreements and even minor conflicts with each other. I mean, India and China had that border conflict. You also have Pakistan and India, a famous rivalry, or potential for conflict there. So it's not quite as simple as being just like the Eastern Bloc. This is not just like the Cold War all over again. There's something more to how the nations behave and relate to each other. Yeah. So yeah, I want to just finish with this document here. So if we go a bit further along, we can see that particularly in the 90s, one of the other, moments or sparks that created the initiative to drive for the SCO and closer relations between Russia and China is the bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, in Serbia, and the whole Yugoslav war. So the war that wasn't allowed by the Security Council, a unipolar war with NATO and the US taking part in doing that, which only gets worse if you look further back, if you look at Libya and whatnot. So a big part of this is unipolar actions by the West, which shaped the urge for China to make this kind of new relationship with the rest of Asia, basically, and Russia. I'm just going to push along through here one second. And I think that's all I want to say from this document. Yes. Okay. So that's this one here. The next thing that I think is a good document is another one, which just is called, it's the title of the document is What the West Gets Wrong About the SCO. So I think this is actually the best one so far I've seen in terms of getting an understanding of what the SCO does and what it actually looks like. And I think that's what we're going to try and achieve here, is like try and show the actual things that actually go on. Because when you look at an SCO meeting, it's quite boring. They just talk and there's lots of meetings, and sort of it feels a bit like the World Economic Forum, where it's a bit unclear as to what is actually going on.
It seems to be whenever it's reported on, it's the meeting itself taking place, which is the news. The fact that the leaders of these sort of like an anti-West coalition are meeting, discussing. What are they discussing? That's not really important, because for the 24-hour news cycle, it's quite boring news to sort of digest. Yeah,
it is. And also there's a lot of like details. There's deals that are signed, and might say 15 billion, and you actually have to look at that deal to find something interesting and find actually what's going on. And when you do start digging into it, at least for me, what I saw was you then see the SCO, and obviously the bigger term here is the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI. You see how closely linked SCO, BRI, BRICS, then the Russian projects of the Eurasian EU, AUS, whatever, the European Union equivalent for Central Asia being pushed by Russia. You see actually the sort of the BRICS, the actual BRICS of BRICS and the BRICS of the BRI, the actual belts and roads. But you have to sort of think through the details, because it isn't quite always there for you to grab. So yeah, let's just take a look at this one here. So things like the International North-South Transport Corridor, which is driven by Iran, Russia, India, and Azerbaijan. Then you have, obviously, like I just said, the Russian-led Eurasian Economic Union. This FCO meeting is basically a platform where they all come together, leaders, and they work out mostly bilateral stuff. So it's not so much that the SCO makes these grand sort of things that affect everyone, but you meet and certain countries, maybe trilateral, maybe a few more, but usually it's bilateral, make a deal. So for example, you've got that transport corridor there, but another one to look at is Silk Roads, where we go. So you have the what's called the central line, or the middle line, sorry, the middle corridor, which is a rail line which will go from China to Europe via Iran and Turkey. And basically, this thing's important. Obviously, it cuts across the Caspian Sea too. This thing's important, though, particularly because of the war right now in Ukraine. Even the SCO members have had some issues, with sanctions and whatnot, trying to get stuff along that northern corridor, which is just the old Trans-Siberian Railway, effectively. And this middle corridor is a way to then, if there is some issue with one of the partners, they can then have an alternative route. I think I've got an actual picture of this.
Has become an issue and will become, I think, more of an issue because of sanctions again, would be initially the Afghan government of President, I can't remember his name, it's escaped me, the one who fled.
Hamid Karzai, not Hamid Karzai, Ashraf Ghani.
He was the original, yes.
Ghani,
so he was an observer status for the Republic of Afghanistan. But the SCO website doesn't seem to have updated since the Taliban have taken over, and it's now the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is still listed as an observer, and I just couldn't work out whether that's out-of-date information or whether they are leaving that potential door open for a Taliban-led government, because obviously that route through Afghanistan is pretty important. So I thought that was a bit of obviously there's no information that I can really gather, so it would just be down to our sort of guesswork whether a Taliban-led government could potentially be some sort of.
So it's a good observation. Yeah, great observation, Chris. So you're right in saying that the Afghan government Afghanistan is listed as an observer state, and that's been, that was arranged by the old government. But what I can say is that at this last meeting, they did make the agreement to open up a new route through Afghanistan. So as a part of an SCO structure, as a part of the, here we go, a part of the infrastructure. So I'm going to open this one up here. So they did start a transport corridor. That a 3-month trial has begun on this corridor, which does go through Afghanistan. So I'm assuming that the Taliban know something about this, because it would be very crazy for the Chinese and whoever else in the CSCO is involved, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, to send trucks, willy-nilly. So this is the beginning. So several containers are currently on the move. The first containers left the Chinese city of Kashgar on the 13th of September, and the trial period is set to last for 3 months. So this was reported by the Kyrgyz Rail Authority. And so what is this new corridor? The first leg is by truck from Kashgar. Containers are trucked across the border to Kyrgyz city of Osh. It is here they're loaded onto a train, which continues where it's across the Central Asian countries country to reach its final destination in Haratan in Afghanistan. So this stuff does go into Afghanistan. So
Yes.
But this is actually a very positive thing, though, for Afghanistan, because right now most shipping goes to Afghanistan through this port of Karachi, which is in Pakistan. If this overland route works, that can take 2 weeks. Means the journey is basically 2 weeks from China to Afghanistan, whereas that overseas route, the Karachi route, is 2 months. So that makes a huge difference to logistics for Afghanistan.
Yeah, and obviously for the Taliban government, they've been completely economically shut out of the systems that they had available to them under the previous government. I can completely. They said from day one of their new government that they're eager to sort of re-enter the world stage as partners. So gone are the days of fighting off the godless communists. They're more than willing and eager to take business investment of anyone willing to help them. And if China are the ones offering that and America aren't, then this is another example of America not being able to see 2 steps in front of itself.
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious as to see, there might be some dusty old plans somewhere as to what the role of the Afghan government was supposed to be in the grand picture of American sort of geopolitics. Obviously, there was supposed to be a pro-Western state that was throwing a thorn in the side of Iran and of all of the Central Asian guys, as well as China and SCO. But obviously those plans, and exactly. And those plans are, I guess they'll be somewhere in an archive somewhere. Well, they probably burned them, actually. I mentioned.
Yeah.
They don't want to keep those lying around.
Oh, it's sat in a basement in Mar-a-Lago.
Right, or in a basement in Mar-a-Lago, absolutely, yes, top secret one. Yeah, but okay, so as always, we've taken on a big topic that's a big thing to bite into, sort of chew and digest. So I don't know if you want to go particularly to something next in regarding discussing and explaining SCO.
So obviously we've talked about when this was founded. It was founded in 2001. So obviously that's something that's quite obvious that this was in that decade of void of wondering of the Soviet Union. Obviously, one thing that I thought was quite interesting, just jumping about a little bit, I saw that Turkey actually applied for membership in 2014, which is still being discussed. And in doing so, they rescinded their request to join the European Union. Because, of course, Turkey had their tippy toe in Europe, so that makes them European, apparently. Obviously, it's just following the Turkish tradition of switching sides whenever you feel like it. I almost love how much of a rogue cannonball they are on the deck at this stage. Obviously, just to sort of show an evidence that this is, despite the secrecy around it in the Western media, it is a growing power where you could almost argue that the West's economic power is declining in the fact that the West really isn't unified as it was. I don't know if a lot of people sort of know this, but with the terms first world, third world, usually the one that gets used about third world country, as Trump would have called it, a shithole third world country, meaning a poor country. But this isn't what these terms mean. These terms are referring to the first world being NATO allied, second world being Soviet and Warsaw Pact allied, third world was non-allied. These weren't anything to do with the economics. If you use it in the same way, Singapore is a third world country, yet it is incredibly rich.
Very wealthy. Wealthy,
it shows that these things don't. Now, what we're actually looking at here with the membership of the SCO, a lot of these would have been former second world countries, former allied states of the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact. A few weeks ago, you made this point that we did an episode of Gorbachev dying, and when he gave his interviews after the Soviet Union collapse, he was always, I didn't realize the fallout, what would happen. I tried to keep the union together. The SCO is almost everyone else's attempt to sort of undo what he did. They saw this need to be together in some primarily economic sense, the SCO do constantly state we are not a military organization. Now, there was an attempt, I believe, in 2014, it was debated whether to merge this with the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which is a military alliance of primarily former Soviet states. China isn't a party to it. Obviously, with everything that's going on at the moment, I imagine Russia would be more than eager for China to join the military security alliance. And they've got treaties. But it does feel like what the SCO is, what we're looking at, is an organization in its infancy. It is growing and it is evolving. And as I think a lot of what China does, it is soft power. They do things by making friends and helping people, not by invading for resources, and like how America has done and does do. Is it a sort of more structured sort of narrative that you'd want to look at?
No. I think you're doing a good job. I'm listening. It's good. I do have something to add. I'll just add to, in terms of what you're saying is with Gorbachev again. We do want to try and give him a hard time. Well, we are giving him a hard time. You saw the breakup of an integrated economic system across Eurasia, from Belarus all the way to Alaska, and further, obviously with the gas in Europe, you're seeing obviously even further. But yes, so a lot of these republics, the Soviet republics, the Central Asian republics, if you look at their rail networks, I'm going to put this map up here, which shows you sort of how the integration worked. You can see that really we had a delay in history, or not a delay in history, but a backward moment where things went backwards, and now we're going forwards again, where we are reintegrating. So 1 second, I'm just going to get this map up, which is one moment. Which one is it? Sorry, it's a really difficult one. So this is a map from the United Nations, which shows you all of the rail networks of Central Asia and how they work, basically, and how they're integrated, how they're connected. And so it's quite complicated, but what I'll help you with and what I'll assist you in explaining is that there are different widths in train tracks, okay? So we knew this when the here we go. No, I can't see. Here we go. Yes, there it is. Okay, it's open. It's up. We knew this was a problem when they had the grain discussion. So they're trying to get the grain out of Ukraine recently, and
one of the tracks.
Well, the width, right? So Soviet track or Russian track is much wider than European track. So they couldn't just take the trains from Ukraine and just take them to a European port, because they'd have to get them off the trains onto the new trains and then drive them to the ports of Europe to then ship them around the world. So if you look at this map here, I'll zoom in a bit. This is a trans-Asian railway network. So if you're looking at the red stuff, that is old Soviet or Russian lines. Some of it is Trans-Siberian and some of it obviously is Soviet. And that's all, on the Russian gauge, so the Russian size of track. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. But yeah, you can see then that like all of the Central Asian countries have that gauge. They have Russian gauge. So if you're looking over here, you've got Dushanbe, which is obviously in Uzbekistan. Then you've got Turkmenabad, which is in Turkmenistan. So you can see all of these guys have got the red track, and that goes all the way to the Caucasus, etc. But what we're looking at now, what the SCO's projects is basically linking up these gray parts. So if you see the gray part here, you've got the green is Chinese. So that's the Chinese tracks, which are, I think, 1,000 mils or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's smaller than the Russian one. You can see Urumqi there. So that's Xinjiang. It does link up here. So at that point there, the trains have to stop and then offload. Okay. But over here, you actually have no connection. So the SCO, the deals that they've signed recently is about linking up these gray areas. So between China and Kyrgyzstan, and then obviously you also have that, like we said, the Afghanistan line, but of course that one is by truck. It's not as developed. And then you also have stuff in the middle here with, I believe, Mongolia. Yeah, Mongolia. So that's what the Belt and Road looks like. You're talking about building these gray areas and linking stuff up globally. I mean, obviously it does also go down here into Vietnam and stuff, but that's not really the subject of today's discussion. But yeah, that's the integration that was lost and disrupted when you broke up the Soviet Union.
Yes.
And this SCO is a partial, reemergence of connecting the world again, and connecting at least that part of the world again. Yeah.
And that, with the tracks, it's such a simple problem to sort of overlook. Like, I don't think most people would even have ever realized that you think trains are trains and tracks are tracks, and you think that everybody uses a slightly different version that's completely incompatible with each other's. But obviously, that's such a huge problem to try and overcome, but such an easy one to overlook.
Right. It is. I mean, obviously, I think, obviously because it started with each country developing its own railway system and whatnot, but yeah, it is a huge problem. I mean, on that map there is an example. There is a specific dual gauge line between Vietnam and China, but that has not been successful for Russia and the former Soviet Union and China linking up their trains. So usually has to switch to Russian gauge. There's something that Xi said in his speech as well. So Xi went to this meeting in Samarkand, the SCO meeting that happened 2 weeks ago. And it was the first trip he made out of China since the pandemic. So it's very important. So there's something very important about that. I mean, politicians and leaders usually speak through acts like that, sort of making a statement in terms of where did you go first.
And it does. It's very important. Like when you look at
it's very important.
Meetings with Biden and President Xi, and the fact they're just over video camera, to me it gives the impression, well, this isn't important enough for me to meet you in person. Right. But the fact that he will leave the office to go and meet these people, it's a sign of respect, isn't it? And a sign of seriousness.
Yeah. I mean, the main reason, of course, has been COVID. He doesn't want to leave because of COVID. Yes. He's told basically everyone who goes out has to do lots of quarantine to get back. So he's leading from the front in the sense that, okay, I'm also going to stay here. I'm not going to leave. And I haven't, even though I'm the leader and I need to do these things, I haven't done it. I believe the only leader that he would have met actually in the last 3 years might have been Putin, who came to the Olympics in February. I'd stand to be corrected on that. But nonetheless, he actually technically also didn't go to the SCO meeting first. He first went to Kazakhstan, so 2 weeks ago, which again shows you the importance of Kazakhstan to China. So Kazakhstan is also where she made the BRI speech, the first BRI speech, as they call it now. He was at a university and he unveiled this idea. It was the birth of this idea of the Belt and Road Initiative and the new Silk Roads and all that kind of stuff. But in the speech that he made to Kazakhstan, he said something very interesting, which I never thought about before, which is when we talk about the Belt and Road Initiative and the Silk Roads and stuff, we usually think about Chinese goods going to Europe or European goods going to China and vice versa. But actually, he makes a very interesting point. So this is from his speech. He says, at the China-Kazakhstan International Logistics Base in the eastern Chinese port of Liaoyungan, products from Kazakhstan set sail for the Pacific Ocean. So you're not talking about the goods actually even staying in China, being sold in China. You're talking about the goods, Kazakh goods, going to America or South America or wherever. Which I never thought about, actually.
It's mutual aid. So it's not just saying that, well, it was our idea, so it's going to benefit us the most because we're China. It is literally everyone who joins this initiative is going to help you, whoever you're trading with.
Yeah. So it's actually a network. Yeah, right.
There are European states that want to be part of it. So it's going to make trade between Kazakhstan and Italy easier. It's going to make trade between Italy and Norway easier, provided these states are signatories for this. Yeah.
And that's the other thing that I think when these guys talk about this being a new form of international relations, is that you have projects. So, for example, there's a Greek port, I believe the Costco port, is a part of the BRI. So there's technically no list, like definitive government-approved list of BRI projects. But it's more of a sort of, okay, this would be defined as something that is associated with that. So you can have countries which are in the EU, which are in NATO, like Greece, and it has a port, which is Chinese funded and is normally a part of the BRI. So that's the other thing that is quite interesting about this type of power, this type of development, is that it's not quite so it's more finessed. It's far more nuanced. It's not such a sort of Tetris kind of blocks falling together like that. It's far more networked, I think. Yeah,
and it just goes to show whenever there's anything positive to say, I think that's why they don't try to repeat it, because when you talk about it, there's so many positives, so the media would just rather not. I was showing my fiance a few days ago a video. We were talking about sort of cancel culture. I said if there's anybody who's managed to avoid cancel culture, it is Akon. Because Akon did an interview a few years ago where, do you know where he's been since he stopped really doing music? He's been in Africa.
And he's in Africa doing charity work stuff, right?
He managed to basically electrify like 100 million African homes. And when he goes on to these shows to talk about how he did it, he says, nobody has done more to help Africa than China. And because the Chinese gave him the grant to do this. And he's got, but because he's, as far as the media have got, he's just gone mad and just ran off with China to go and do stuff in Africa. So they just don't want to know.
Yeah, that's cancel culture.
That's purely an example of cancel culture. The fact that he's doing this absolute accomplishment has just been abandoned because he did this with the help of Chinese-led initiative.
Right. Yeah. The original cancel culture.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's also another part about this, is that Western narrative, Western media hates to talk about the success of the BRI. And also there isn't a Western counterpart. There isn't any, right now, there is no Western-backed project that matches in cost or ambition what the BRI has already done and will plan to do, and plans to do, sorry. Yeah, I mean, and also when there are some issues, like they always bring up this thing about the port in Sri Lanka, and there was also this fake news story about this airport in Uganda. The Western media always jumps on this with, okay, debt trap diplomacy. This is imperialism and all sorts of stuff. I think we'll have to talk about that on a specific episode, actually, talk about that port and the airport story as well. That'd be quite good. Because, those are, I think they need some depth of conversation, which I haven't done the research for tonight. But yeah,
they do manage to find some random African man who will go on camera and say, the Chinese, and just slag them off. And it's the African equivalent of the MAGA nutter with a cap on, wearing sunglasses in his truck, ranting. It's like you've just found some madman who said, "Do you want to be on camera and talk shit about China?" It's like, yeah, sure.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
Every time you speak to an economist, I think they're saying that this is what China are doing is a net positive in Africa. They find stories that are generally sort of ridiculous. I have to point them out, like about things like racism and things. So these things are illegal in China. So you can't use the minority and then call it the rule. Yeah. There are racists in every country. You're finding anecdotal stories about a racist official, Chinese official in Africa, being horrible to African workers. So, if I've heard about this information, I can guarantee someone in China has. This person's probably already lost the job.
Yeah. I mean, also, like you said, it's a small story. So you take an individual foreman or an individual company that did something or had a bad practice or whatever, and say, okay, well, this means that this is across the board. All of them are doing this, and this is the sum total of everything that's happening here. There's obviously far more positive than negative, and there will always be problems. I mean, you have millions of people involved in these construction projects, and I mean, racism is still a problem. So but the idea that that's coming from the top, the racism is from the top down,
like it's the norm,
is ridiculous. I mean, these people, the Chinese government is, giving off debt relief, loans without any conditions. You're letting these people develop on their own terms. Obviously, there's lots of corruption with African leaders, and of course across many other countries too, including the UK. But the point is that the development is not sort of it's making development progress. There's progress in Africa. And I think that's. But I think that's again that would be another specific. I think we should do a China and Africa episode. That would be interesting and fascinating to go.
Yeah, it would be. There'd be a lot there. But I see the SCO as it's one more modern tool or example of this building and solidifying of the multipolar world in a way that can't really be reversed by any way other than by an absolute catastrophic war. So the media made a big point of, obviously they had the conference, which they have the conference every year. It's always in rotating countries. So this year was Uzbekistan. The only real thing that I heard about it in the Western media was I perceived the SCO leaders aren't very happy with Putin over the issues in Ukraine. Now, obviously, everybody in the SCO and most people want the situation in Ukraine to come to an end as quickly and as painlessly as possible. But that's a different thing from China saying we're not happy with Putin over these actions and these actions. Obviously, in many ways, you can argue that a lot of the SCO have actually benefited from, since the West have stopped buying Russian goods, those goods have started now going more to them, usually better prices. We've talked before about India have been buying a record amount of Russian gas. Obviously, that's now going to China as well. We've talked about the idea of, since Russia have been kicked off the SWIFT banking system, the potential possibility of them now being hooked into China's banking system. I think in many ways China probably, they could do that. I think they're holding off on it because they're like, well, we don't want that level of sanctions to come. If the West sort of see China what would look like laundering Russia's money for them.
Yeah, America, actually, excellent point.
Just share the sanctions on them, which they don't want.
Yeah. I think with what you've just said, there's actually a Russian, one of these academics that goes on CGTN and speaks about the SCO. He said that, in fact, the West shapes the SCO more than the SCO shapes itself. So what you were just talking about there, a new financial system, integrating Russia and the stands and whoever else is in the SCO as a new or counter to SWIFT. That's happened because of sanctions imposed by the West on Russia, but also Iran. So Iran has been pushed into the arms of the SCO because of the West. With nuclear deal with Trump and with obviously the decades-old antagonism between with Iran and the West, they've been pushed into the arms of the SCO and into China and whatnot. And the other thing is,
that's
of course,
almost always how it is with sort of, especially with as Marxists, from when you look at any anti-imperialist coalition, they're always strange bedfellows because they're usually always alliances of necessity. I'm no fan of Islamic clericism. I wouldn't want to live under Shia clerics, but at the same time, we wouldn't be supporting radical left-wing groups to try and take over Iran now of all times. It's like so it does make strange bedfellows, and it is.
It does. Yeah. On the specifics though of how this the West or the US shapes the SCO, we did mention this briefly. So I'm trying to show two things here. So the middle line. So I'll just show you that now. 1 second. So I'll show you the middle line from the Turkish website. So this middle line is busy being built right now because of the fact that shipping stuff or sending it on rail through Russia can violate sanctions and can leave you open to be sanctioned, including Turkey in this case. So they are then going to open up this line, which the train obviously cuts across Central Asia. Then when it hits the Caspian Sea, it goes to Baku, I assume by boat, and then across Azerbaijan, across Georgia, and into Turkey. So that's the kind of stuff that is now being discussed to get around sanctions. And then if you look over here, no, that was it. So that was all I want to show for that one. Was the sorry, I've also got this one here, which is the China, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan railroad deal. So I don't want to show you this one. It hasn't got a nice map, but again, another rail sort of link that's being built because of the SCO meeting. But nonetheless, the whole point that we're making there is that the SCO is largely being shaped by Western actions right now, and geopolitics taking part elsewhere.
So we've spoke about this before. I think in one of our last episodes, we showed videos of an American general given into where basically he gave his sort of fan fiction wet dream scenario of war with China in the next 10 years. And this is something that drumbeat has been repeated a lot. Like John Pilger did that amazing film, The Coming War with China, where he predicted this a long time ago. The Chinese know this. Like, obviously, with Chinese sort of debate, they're not as sort of open with debate as, say, the Soviets were. Every time the Soviets had a debate, they'd release it in a book, and you could buy the book and read it, exactly what was said. Chinese are a bit more sort of, you had to be there to get the minutes. But we know that these discussions do. So I have no doubt that China know that the day is going to come where they're going to be financially cut off from the West. But I believe that they're not eager to accelerate that to come closer. They want to be able to make money and fuel their economy as best they can right until the moment when the door closes. They're smart with that. They are building up military force. And like we've seen and talked about, there are efforts to make a sort of stable, lasting military alliance. The SCO may one day merge into that. But even amongst members of the SCO, they're not militarily unified. So we've seen border disputes between China and India. When you actually watch them, they're actually terrifying because they've got an agreement of no guns basically on the front line. So what you're actually looking at is it's like a medieval army of men with shields and batons moving in like legionaries into positions. And whenever you hear about these clashes and Indians and Chinese soldiers dying, they've been beaten to death by the other side's billy clubs. So, but I suppose when you compare that to the sort of these border conflicts that have happened in neighbouring states, what's the one that's just happened between Tajikistan
and Kyrgyzstan?
I suppose banning your border troops from having guns kind of makes sense when you look at what's happened to them, where silly fallouts can happen over someone putting a security camera up on their border, and then the other side. And this is all a fallout of the way it broke up in the 90s, because they broke up and nobody knew whose land was what. You have enclaves of each other's countries in the neighboring countries. And
I was gonna say I can show you some of this stuff actually. I think this is some interesting stuff. As you just said, the whole border thing. Yes, the Indian-China border clash. Thank God that they have at least good enough relations to say, okay, well, we might not agree where the border is right now, and we are, not happy with each other regarding what you think the border is, what I think the border is. But we can definitely agree that, right. But we can definitely agree that no guns or heavy weapons 50 kilometers away from the border. Let's at least agree to that. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And then that's obviously how you ended up with that whatever it was, 8,000 feet high fight on the Himalayan mountains with clubs. Yeah, which was terrible. I mean, lots of guys died and froze to death. And
it could have been a lot worse.
It could have been, but it could have been a lot worse. I mean, it could have been a full escalation. So sadly, though, Tajik and Kyrgyz have not quite got that part yet, that agreement yet. But I think that's the kind of thing that you'll see the SCO. The SCO wants to resolve border disputes. So it's about economics, it's about infrastructure, it's about security, but it's more about this holistic view of security. So this idea of security being about economics, not just guns and tanks, and also having some sort of mutual relationship with your neighbors. So I'm going to put up this thing here. Just actually two things. One is the 30-year development of, it's a quick one, don't worry, we're not going to watch 30 years of development, of Central Asian republics. So where their economies were in 1990 and where they are today. And I'm just going to jump to some timestamps. So take a look here. So this is 1990. Okay, so as you can see, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan were the wealthiest, and then per capita also the wealthiest. Okay, population, Uzbekistan 20 million, Kazakhstan 16 million, and then the other stands, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan there. Okay, so And if we sort of jump ahead to 1995, you can see that everyone is basically poorer, save Uzbekistan. So yeah, no, even Uzbekistan. So everyone is poorer. Everyone is poorer 5 years after the change. And if you jump ahead to 2000, so 10 years after the breakup, that's when things start to get better. But what I will note, though, is if you look at Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, the poorest, you'll see that Tajikistan had $537 per capita in 1990, and in 2000, so 10 years later, they were down to $156 per capita. So they really, really dropped. So even though Kazakhstan and other countries might have balanced out by the late 90s and early 2000s, a lot of the other republics, specifically Tajikistan, were like dirt poor. Things are not going well. Jump ahead to 2010, you can see things get better. Tajikistan's back to 800, Kazakhstan cruising ahead to 11,500 per person. And then obviously when you get to 2020, you can see that the Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan have done well, really well. The others not so much, and Tajikistan, as much as it has $838 per capita, it's still really poor. Yeah. Other thing to note is just the population. So despite Kazakhstan being the biggest, Uzbekistan has more people by nearly double. So Uzbekistan has 33 million people and Kazakhstan has 18, but Kazakhstan has way more terrain. So that's just an idea, just to give you the sort of some statistics on population and GDP, and obviously just so you can refamiliarize yourself with which one is where, okay?
Yeah.
Because it is kind of confusing even for myself. So this is where it gets interesting, though. So I'm just going to play something from. I'm going to play something from the Caspian Report, which is talking about water wars. Okay, so this is something that affects this region very, very specifically. Very important to this region is water access and the limitation of water access. So I'm just going to put this up here.
Nowhere is this contest more evident than in Ferghana Valley. In this triangular space, two rivers meet to make for a lush, green, fertile basin that is ideal for large settlements, agriculture, and heavy industries. When viewed from above, it is easy to see why this green plain, surrounded by steep mountains and dry steppes, houses about 14 million people, or about a quarter of Central Asia's total population.
Okay, so there you go. That's the Ferghana Valley, very important river network in the stands. So now if we jump ahead, I just want to show you basically what happens is that when these border clashes, there's lots of different things going on. Some of it is related to water, some of it is related to just these enclaves, and then other stuff, sort of economic issues. But I'll jump ahead and just show you the next part, which explains how one of these border clashes basically unfolded. This is not about the recent one that just happened. It's about further back. I think this is last year, this border incident happened. 12, 1 second. Okay, so.
Local irrigation. When the Tajiks placed surveillance cameras at the
Zapier is woven into every part of my business, and I can't live without it. I'm Jay, the COO of Wake Up
the water facility, opposing Kyrgyz protesters came out swinging with rocks and sticks. Before long, border guards joined the fray with guns and mortars. Each side accused the other of firing first, and within hours, attack helicopters, tanks, and mortar shells raged across the area, leaving over 50 dead and more than 40,000 people displaced. It was the heaviest fighting seen in years. And even though the skirmish quickly subsided, it was a rude reminder of how tense the situation is.
So there you go. That's how one of these border clashes unfolds. The other thing that Chris already mentioned is the enclaves. So during the Soviet Union, you had lots of different agreements made between the then Soviet republics as to how to maybe work together on a farming project or give some land in exchange for something else. And you ended up with technically then pieces of territory inside each other's republic. But it didn't matter because it was an open border. It was one, union. And then it collapsed, and there wasn't any foresight to that collapse, as Gorbachev has told us. That was not the plan. And so you ended up then with loads of tiny little villages. Some of them are literally 2-kilometer strips inside each other's country. So if you can see this here, we've got something like this over here, which is the Kyrgyzstan, literally a 2-kilometer long piece of land inside Kyrgyzstan, but it's a Tajik piece of land. Okay, so that's one of the small ones. And then you've got much bigger ones. So this one here, Varukh, a mountain village in Tajikistan, surrounded by Kyrgyzstan, with the whole village in there, quite a big one and quite a big piece of territory there. And there's loads of them. So we can't go through.
Obviously, another example of this would have been the recent issues that we've seen between Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Absolutely.
When you look at a lot of these countries, particularly I seem to notice ex-Soviet states.
Yeah.
Because the borderline on a Soviet state inside the Union is basically drawn in pencil because it doesn't really matter. Like you say, it's an open border. The borders there mostly more about culture than anything else, because the economy is fairly integrated anyway. But when they all become independent of each other, these borders are now drawn in pen and become problems. So you've got these impossible lines that are navigating cultural neighborhoods and cause these enclaves to happen. And when you've got this tension, it's like, well, I'm now surrounded by, in some cases, an unfriendly country's military that is bearing down on my village because we're Armenian. Right. Or Azerbaijan, or don't mean to take sides. I'll get angry Armenians in the comments section. I think I made a point.
Yeah. This comes back to that point though about the legacy of Gorbachev. I know we can go back to this, but you're talking about a legacy of complete chaos, economic collapse, as you saw with loads of those countries there, particularly Tajikistan and the other stands too. Economic deprivation. They went backwards for 10 years. Things got better, but 10 years of lost economic growth. And then, yes, like loads of unresolved issues, like these border regions here. And then having now, a republic, a nationalist republic, a Tajik republic, which stands in opposition to a Kyrgyz one and Uzbek one, which have shared water resources and dams and electric grids. So really a real mess left after the collapse. So again, this is where the SCO then steps in with trying to find means to resolve these border disputes, finding ways to reintegrate and work together. So that in that sense, it's good to have the SCO in Central Asia trying to navigate this. And to be honest, there isn't really any other alternative to resolve these issues. There's no, the UN doesn't really have I don't really see the UN coming in and doing something like that. But also just one quick one, just because I mentioned that. The SCO also does not see itself as something to go over the UN. They have quite openly stated and quite clearly stated that they see the UN as where international geopolitics should take place, in international sort of discussion and rules and law should take place, and where it is.
If you were to sort of compare it or rephrase what the SCO is in sort of terms of maybe like a political party, if sort of you want to pretend the UN is the Labour Party, the SCO would be sort of Labour Marxists, or like a pressure group within to sort of with the SCO's aim is to promote and help build practically a multipolar world, where the UN on paper and a lot of its not American members want that. They behave as if the UN is that, but you all know that it's not. Like, I remember the amazing speech that Muammar Gaddafi gave at the UN, where he basically attacked the UN for being complicit and being in tow of the United States, and said this is meant to be our organization, and it's not anymore, it's theirs. So you can view the SCO of a way of helping countries get the confidence to demand that power back. Just to
Mm.
talk about Africa again, I remember when Barack Obama went to Africa to give his speech, and he basically told African nations, "You've come too late to the industrial revolution. Unfortunately, you can't do it now because the environment's so bad." I was like, well, absolutely not. The alternative is us depending on you and your good faith, if that's even a thing. Where China's saying, well, no, you can industrialize, you can modernize, and we can work it out. It is important for your nation's survival to not depend on another nation. If you do, then, like Thomas Sankara famously said, if the country feeds us, they own us.
Yes. That's
and
it.
I think
that's
that's what I keep saying China in a lot of this when I mean the SCO, but obviously it is from Shanghai. You can very much say this was China's brainchild. China don't believe in intellectual property the way the rest of the world does, so they don't take ownership of this. they will come up with an idea and share it evenly. I think that's the way to view this. And I hope people who have watched this will come away from this understanding that this is an idea in its infancy, but it's a good one, and it's something that we should enjoy watching grow and member states join.
Definitely. And I think my closing remarks will be that I think actually it would be better if the SCO didn't go straight away to making a military alliance. I think it would be much better just to keep winning on the economics front. Keep building railways, keep building bridges, keep building ports, keep resolving issues and building power lines and linking up Central Asia economically, so that when the West, particularly the US, tries to come and breaking and smashing down whatever's been built, the sanctions and the economic decoupling from China or Russia or whoever the victim is of imperialism at the time, that if you want to decouple this country from that, it's so difficult. There's so many bridges, there's so many links, there's so many systems. You can't just turn off Visa. You can't just turn off Switch. You can't just close one pipeline. You're talking about integration is
stop that
a proper Eurasian. Yeah, exactly. If you have the more integrated that Eurasia becomes, the better it is for Eurasians, people on that plateau, in that place of the world. And the better for the rest of us, because imperialism will not be able to take part to do what it needs to do, what it wants to do. They'll make their work much harder.
I completely agree with that.
I think that's it for tonight. So we will come back next week with whichever topic we decide. If you have any comments, please put the comments in. And there are timestamps. I should have mentioned this at the beginning. Use the timestamps that I'll place in. But please like, share, subscribe. We are looking for as many subscribers as we want. We want to try and get to 250. This is our first target, which I've just declared now, I guess. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for watching. See you next week.